Imagine this, friends. Let's turn the clock back to the deep winter of 1926. On a freezing street corner in London, an elderly beggar sits shivering. In front of him lies a piece of cardboard that reads, "Can you help me? I haven't eaten in a long time." Passers-by glance at him occasionally as they rush past. But no one stops and no one drops a coin. At this moment, a man dressed simply but with eyes that are piercingly sharp squats down beside him. This man is none other than Ludwig Wittgenstein, who is on his way to teach at Cambridge. He does not give the beggar money directly. Instead, he wipes away the vague words on the cardboard with his hand and rewrites a new sentence: "I need a hot dog and a cup of coffee. The total cost is 10 pence. The beggar looks at him in confusion, but Wittgenstein remains calm and says, "Watch the miracle happen." He explains, "Your previous message saying you haven't eaten in a long time was too vague. It only triggered a vague sense of pity in passers-by. And most people choose to look away to avoid this moral discomfort. But this new request is placed before them like a clear math problem. It is no longer a bottomless emotional black hole, but a small precise problem that can be solved with just 10 pence. Sure enough, a gentleman stops, looks at the sign, and says, "I can buy you that hot dog and coffee." Immediately after, a lady hands over 30 pence directly in less than half an hour. The beggar's income is 10 times what it was before. Wittgenstein looks at the shocked beggar and says something profound: "What you receive from the world depends not on how desperate you are, but on how clear a picture your language can construct." He further explains, "If you say the world is unfair, that is too vague, and your world is trapped in boundless darkness because of it. But if you say, I was rejected at the Schmidt factory interview because of my disabled left leg, then your world presents a concrete problem that can be targeted and solved. The limits of your language are the limits of your world. The dilemma you cannot articulate clearly is the prison you cannot escape." Hello everyone, I'm Raymond Shadow. Today I will provide a deep interpretation of one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century, Ludwig Wittgenstein, and take you through the relationship between language and the world. In the eyes of many, philosophy is the most useless discipline, and only the wealthy have the luxury to study it. There was a meme circulating online previously, saying, "Unless your family owns a mine, do not major in philosophy." The reason for this saying might very well be because of Wittgenstein. Because Wittgenstein was a philosopher whose family literally owned mines. Wittgenstein carries many labels. Archetypal super-rich heir, a man from a family of mining tycoons, Adolf Hitler's secondary school classmate, a sufferer of solitude, the handsomest philosopher and a genius philosopher. Wittgenstein was indeed a philosophical genius and a legend. Even the great philosopher Bertrand Russell once said, "Getting to know Wittgenstein was one of the most exciting intellectual adventures of his life." Russell also praised him, calling Wittgenstein the most perfect example of genius. Why is Wittgenstein considered a legend? On one hand, it is due to his life experiences. On the other, it is due to his philosophical thought. In the world of philosophy, proposing one original philosophical idea is already remarkable. But Wittgenstein not only proposed a philosophical thought, he effectively inaugurated a philosophical era, the era of modern analytic philosophy. Moreover, Wittgenstein personally dismantled the very philosophical system he had established in his early years. Such a philosopher, possessing this level of reflective and critical spirit, is rare in the history of philosophy. Most philosophers hold on to their own set of ideas until death. But Wittgenstein had no such obsession. So how did Wittgenstein found analytic philosophy? And how did he overthrow the philosophical system he built with his own hands? Before we unfold Wittgenstein's philosophy, let's briefly introduce his legendary life. Wittgenstein was born in 1889 in Vienna, Austria. His father Karl was of Jewish descent. Wittgenstein was the archetypal super-rich kid. His family was one of the most prominent dynasties in Europe. Describing them as having wealth equivalent to a nation is no exaggeration. The family business spanned steel, railways, shipping, finance and construction. His family was known as the Sixth Empire of Europe. You can see that their prominence wasn't just about wealth. Those who frequented the Wittgenstein home were the elite of society at the time. His parents were highly cultured. The house was always full of musician friends, like Schumann, Mahler, and Brahms, who were frequent guests. The house contained 7 grand pianos, and he taught himself piano at home from a young age. However, a rich family does not necessarily mean a happy one. In this wealthy artistic clan, there was a tragic and eerie trait of a high suicide rate. Wittgenstein had 4 brothers, 3 of whom committed suicide. At the age of 23, Wittgenstein said, "For the past 9 years he had lived in terrifying loneliness, hovering on the brink of suicide. His greatest fear in life was losing his mind or his life before completing his work." Perhaps the successive suicides of his brothers affected his character, causing Wittgenstein to become rebellious and solitary. Internally sensitive, he suffered from long-term depression and had a fiery temper. It is said that once, while discussing a problem with philosopher Karl Popper, they almost came to blows. The young Wittgenstein loved mechanics and technology. At age 10, he built a simple sewing machine and aspired to become an engineer. In 1906, Wittgenstein went to Berlin to study mechanical engineering. In 1908, he entered the Victoria University of Manchester in the UK to study aeronautical engineering and aerodynamics. During this period, Wittgenstein read Principia Mathematica by Russell and Whitehead, and The Foundations of Arithmetic by Frege. This sparked his interest in mathematics. Consequently, he moved to Cambridge University to study mathematics under Russell. Although Wittgenstein inherited a vast fortune, he had little interest in wealth. He gave all his inheritance to his siblings, keeping not a penny for himself. He participated in World War I and was taken as a prisoner of war. It is said that Wittgenstein was incredibly brave in battle, charging into the front lines, and was decorated for valor several times. However, after facing war and the grief of death, Wittgenstein began to rethink philosophy. This led to his first major work, the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. This book struggled to find a publisher. It was eventually published only with Russell's recommendation. After completing the Tractatus, he felt he had solved all philosophical problems. In the book's preface, Wittgenstein proudly declared, "The problems have in essentials been finally solved." Believing there was little left to do, he chose to become a rural schoolteacher in a remote Austrian village, living a simple life. However, life as a village teacher was not pleasant. Coupled with his eccentric personality and explosive temper, he frequently clashed with parents and even physically disciplined students. It is said that once, he hit a sickly student so hard, the child was injured and had to be taken to a hospital. Wittgenstein was terrified and immediately ended his teaching career. In 1930, he returned to the philosophical world. With Russell's help, he obtained a teaching position at Cambridge. He left Cambridge during the war, but later returned to teach philosophy until 1947, when Wittgenstein grew tired of the academic circles at Cambridge. He left Cambridge to live in Ireland, where he worked on the book Philosophical Investigations. Over a year later, the Philosophical Investigations was still unfinished, but he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. He felt he could no longer continue his work. He had always wanted to finish Philosophical Investigations but only wrote half, leading to the book remaining unpublished. At the time of his death, he even wrote in the preface, he wanted to write a good book. This had not been realized, but he could improve it. But his time had passed. Although he didn't finish his research, Wittgenstein did not feel particular regret. He wrote in his notebook that while someone might say, it is a grave matter to die before finishing one's work, in another sense, this is not the point. In his later years, Wittgenstein became much gentler, no longer as irritable or harsh as before. At the end of his life, Wittgenstein did not want to die in a hospital. Instead, he chose to move into the home of Dr. Bevan. Mrs. Bevan had heard that Wittgenstein was a great philosopher, but had a terrible temper. She was initially hesitant, but eventually agreed. She found that he was not as grumpy as the legends suggested. He would discuss interesting topics with Mrs. Bevan. Every evening he would go to a nearby pub and order 2 glasses of red wine. But Wittgenstein didn't drink them. Instead, he poured the wine into the pub's potted plants. Mrs. Bevan recalled, this was the only dishonest thing she ever saw him do. Wittgenstein passed away in 1951 at the age of 62. On his deathbed, Mrs. Bevan told Wittgenstein that his friends were on their way. Wittgenstein said to her, tell them, I've had a wonderful life. Wittgenstein had a legendary life. He was a maverick in character and unique in philosophy. He possessed immense wealth, but willingly gave it all away to become an ordinary rural teacher. He lived extremely simply, never wearing a suit, tie, or hat in his life, preferring simple clothes. His health was poor, and he could have avoided military service. Yet he insisted on participating in both World War I and II. It can be said that every major turn in his life was filled with courage and determination, which is very rare among philosophers. Of course, Wittgenstein became one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century, not because of his legendary life, but because of his profound philosophical thought. It is said that if a philosopher can propose one theory that transcends traditional philosophy in their lifetime, they are remarkable. But Wittgenstein did it twice. This is what makes Wittgenstein great and legendary. Modern Western philosophy has 3 mountains: Kant, Nietzsche, and Wittgenstein. Kant represents the peak of traditional metaphysics and rationalist philosophy. Especially Kant's epistemology is the summit of early modern Western philosophy. Nietzsche guided Western traditional philosophy from rationalism toward irrationalism, opening the door to modern and contemporary philosophy, especially influencing postmodern philosophy profoundly. It can be said Nietzsche was a philosopher ahead of his time. As Nietzsche himself said, some are born posthumously. Perhaps to some extent Nietzsche's thought is such an existence. The third is Wittgenstein. He guided the transition of Western philosophy from traditional metaphysics to the philosophy of language. Western philosophy shifted from traditional ontology and traditional metaphysics to the philosophy of language. Many say this represents the decline of philosophy, a rejection, avoidance, and inability to address fundamental problems. But is that true? Today we will focus on this linguistic turn in Western philosophy. If there is a major distinction between early modern and contemporary philosophy, the linguistic turn is the most obvious marker. The linguistic turn of Western philosophy was a massive revolution in the history of philosophy. And the key word of this revolution is language. In the past 2,000 years of Western philosophy, language was not the core discourse. From the ontology of ancient Greece to the epistemology of the modern era, from Plato's theory of forms to Descartes' I think therefore I am, idea and substance, reason and experience, consciousness and existence, subject and object. These were the core discourses of Western philosophy. As Engels once said, the core question of Western philosophy for the past 2,000 years was the relationship between consciousness and existence. Whether idealism or materialism, whether empiricism or rationalism, they all viewed language as a representational tool for understanding the world. It had only symbolic value. It was just the appearance of thought. Aristotle said spoken words are the symbols of mental experience, and written words are the symbols of spoken words. Traditional philosophy held that language is the representation of thought. Language is a reproduction of the world, a reliable tool and medium for us to know the world. In the process of exploring truth, humans were the absolute masters, and language was merely a tool used by humans to express and reproduce our ideas. However, as philosophy developed, philosophers began to realize that language is not a perfect tool. They began to doubt and deny the representational capacity of language. Language gradually moved from a subordinate position of representation to the core discourse of contemporary Western philosophy. Some philosophers discovered that it is not humans who manipulate and utilize language. Conversely, language manipulates or limits human thinking. The most representative quote is from analytic philosopher Wittgenstein. "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." Furthermore, hermeneutic philosopher Gadamer said, "Being that can be understood is language." Structuralist philosopher Derrida said there is nothing outside the text. Contemporary philosophy, whether analytic philosophy, ordinary language philosophy or logical positivism, hermeneutics or linguistics, or structuralism and deconstructionism, all treat language as the core discourse of philosophy. Therefore, we can say the linguistic turn is the most distinct and massive philosophical shift from the 19th to the 20th century, perhaps without rival. In this turn, Wittgenstein is an absolute representative figure, but not the only one. There are three main trends. First is the Anglo-American analytic philosophy turn, represented by Frege, Russell, Wittgenstein, Carnap, Rorty, and Chomsky. Second is the German hermeneutic turn, represented by Dilthey, Heidegger, and Gadamer. Third is the French linguistic turn, represented by Saussure, Foucault, and Derrida. These distinctions are not strictly compartmentalized. While language is a core theme for all, their focus differs. First, analytic philosophy, represented by Frege, Russell, and Wittgenstein, treats language as the primary object of analysis. Frege founded modern logic also known as mathematical logic. In their view, language is our channel to know the world. Logical analysis of language itself can lead to an understanding of the world. Previously, philosophers focused on the objects of the world, while analytic philosophy shifted focus to the language representing thoughts. Analytic philosophy mainly focuses on the logical analysis of word meanings, viewing philosophy as an activity of clarifying meaning. For instance, Moritz Schlick, founder of logical positivism, said philosophy is not a system of knowledge, but a system of activities. This positively expresses the characteristics of the great modern transition. Philosophy is the activity of discovering or determining the meaning of propositions. In the view of analytic philosophy, the core discourse is no longer in perception, reason, intuition, or ideas, but has become words, concepts, objects, meaning, sense, and logic. Secondly, hermeneutics, represented by Dilthey and Gadamer, treats language itself, explanation and interpretation, as objects of study. They advocate understanding the world and humans ourselves through the method of interpretation. Gadamer said, "The preconditions of hermeneutics are simply language. Language is the universal medium in which understanding occurs. But language is not just a tool or symbol in the usual sense. Language has an ontological status and significance. It is the place where being and truth manifest." To Gadamer, language is not an empty sign manipulated by man. Language and existence actually exist simultaneously, rather than sequentially. So he says being that can be understood is language. In hermeneutics, especially in the thoughts of Heidegger and Gadamer, language is elevated to an ontological philosophical significance. The third is structuralist linguistics, founded by Saussure. It opened up vast intellectual space for later French structuralism and postmodern philosophy, bringing a new way to understand and grasp the world. Saussure, as a linguist and founder of structuralism, established linguistics as an independent discipline. He said language is based on signs and meaning. Scientific meaning is actually created by language. The world is composed of relations constituted by language, not by facts. He distinguished between language and speech. He dedicated himself to studying the system structure of language itself, viewing language as a sign system. Signs are composed of the signifier and the signified. The signified is the concept. The signifier is the sound and image. But the relationship between the signified and signifier is arbitrary and random, not fixed. Structuralist linguistics, founded by Saussure, laid the foundation for the development of German Gestalt psychology, French psychoanalysis, structuralism, and deconstructionism. These are the three trends of the modern linguistic turn. In summary, the linguistic turn is an important breakthrough in the post-Kant and Hegel era. Is the linguistic turn a regression or progress of traditional philosophy? Some say the turn to language philosophy reflects a rejection and inability to address traditional metaphysical questions, thus it is a regression. For example, Wittgenstein said, "Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must remain silent." In this sense, the turn of analytic philosophy is an end to traditional metaphysics. But others say, this is progress in Western philosophy, because the linguistic turn opened up a series of brand new philosophical fields. It had a huge impact on analytic philosophy, logical positivism, philosophy of science, hermeneutic, structuralism, and deconstructionism. From this perspective, the turn of analytic philosophy not only highlighted the value of metaphysics, independent of and transcending human empirical paradigms, but also opened a door for contemporary philosophy. Wittgenstein was a great philosopher. He not only proposed an idea, but also created a philosophy. He even personally overthrew and subverted his own philosophy. This is rare in the history of philosophy. So how did he do it? Wittgenstein has two typical works or masterpieces, called Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus and Philosophical Investigations. They proposed two diametrically opposite ideas. The latter book is a critique and reflection on the former. Wittgenstein wrote in the preface to Philosophical Investigations, "Since beginning to occupy myself with philosophy again 16 years ago, I have been forced to recognize grave mistakes in what I wrote in that first book. This prompted him to write this book, Philosophical Investigations." At the same time, Wittgenstein said, "I should not like my writing to spare other people the trouble of thinking, but if possible, to stimulate someone to thoughts of his own. Philosophy does not give you the answer directly. The important thing is to inspire you to think." Wittgenstein's philosophical thought can be roughly divided into two stages. One is before the age of 40, centered on the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. He proposed the famous picture theory of language, distinguishing between the sayable and the unsayable. The other is after the age of 40, centered on philosophical investigations. He proposed the famous language game theory, critiquing his previous thoughts severely and overturning them. Simply put, his early thought leaned towards an essentialist view of language, meaning one could create a set of languages to explain the world and everything. Just as he said in the book, "The world is the totality of facts, and language is the totality of propositions. A proposition is a picture of the facts." Wittgenstein's later philosophical thought underwent a major shift. He believed natural language is too rich. There is no single set of languages that can understand the world and explain everything. And the language created by mathematical logic generally does not handle context well. So he believed language has no essence, because language changes with life and time. Language is just a tool. Language is a game based on our forms of life, meaning language is formed in the process of communication, because of the needs of life. As life changes, language changes with it. For example, the word apple in some environments represents fruit, while in others, it might represent a mobile phone. Epistemologically, his early thought leaned more towards logical positivism, an essentialist thought, believing the world has an essence, and we can reveal this essence with language. His later thought is anti-essentialist, believing the world has no so-called essence, and we cannot reveal an essence with language. Wittgenstein gave a very vivid example. In Philosophical Investigations, he said placing a ruler against an object does not tell you how long the object is. Conversely, the ruler itself is dead. It cannot achieve what thought can achieve. This is like imagining. The essence of a living person is their outward shape, then making a block of wood into this shape, and looking with shame at this dead wood, which has no similarity to the living being. In the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, Wittgenstein used language to divide the sayable and the unsayable. Regarding the sayable part, he proposed the famous picture theory of language to explain the relationship between language and the world. In this relationship there are two aspects. One is language. The other is the world. Wittgenstein said, "The world is the totality of facts, and language is the totality of propositions. A proposition is a picture of the facts." This conclusion is key. It is the general conclusion of the book. A fact is composed of objects and the relationship between objects. For example, the apple is sweet. This is a fact. It is composed of two objects, apple and sweet, and the relationship between them. So the world is the totality of facts, not the totality of individual things. We express it in language as a proposition composed of two simple concepts, apple and sweet, and the relationship between them. So language is the totality of propositions. What is the connection between facts and propositions? This is the picture theory of language. Simply put, there is a correspondence between facts and propositions. When we say the proposition "the apple is sweet," the proposition we speak is an abstract picture of the fact. This feeling is like when you miss someone. A picture of that person appears in your brain. So there is a logical correspondence between objective facts and linguistic propositions. Since language is the totality of propositions, and the world is the totality of facts, we can draw a conclusion about the relationship between language and the world. Language can reveal the logical relationships of the world. This is Wittgenstein using the picture theory to link abstract language with the objective real world, forming a correspondence. This is the core idea of the Tractatus. This is also the part that is sayable. Regarding the metaphysical part, the unsayable part, Wittgenstein calls it the mystical. Mainly 5 types: ethics and life, self, the existence of the world, and the meaning of the world. These are things we cannot express in language, or cannot explain clearly with logical language. So even if spoken, they have no meaning. For example, the meaning of life. What one should do. What is good? What is happiness? What is God? Does God exist? And aesthetics and art, etc. These core questions of traditional philosophy, for Wittgenstein, are outside of logic. They are unsayable. So at the end of the Tractatus he said, "Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must remain silent." In the Tractatus, Wittgenstein believed language is the totality of propositions. The world is the totality of facts. There is a pictorial relationship between propositions and facts. There is a logical correspondence between language and the world. So if we figure out the logic of language, we figure out the world. But there is a problem here, or a premise, that the propositions described by language are static, pure and precise. For example, the apple is sweet. This is a fact. But later Wittgenstein believed linguistic propositions are not static, nor are they precise. Propositions are dynamic. There is no uniqueness, and no so-called essence. For example, it's sunny. The weather is hot. This hot means something different to everyone. Northerners might feel hot, while Southerners might not. Early Wittgenstein analyzed language statically. Logic was perfect, pure and precise. But this assumption was too idealized. So later Wittgenstein abandoned his previous theories, leaning towards logical positivism, and turned to the ordinary language school, focusing on the actual use of language. But since logical positivism and ordinary language philosophy are both important branches of analytic philosophy. Wittgenstein is an important representative of analytic philosophy. Later Wittgenstein merged language and behavior, calling it language games. He believed the exploration of linguistic meaning should not be viewed from a single static perspective, but from a more diverse perspective, to understand the meaning of language from its different uses. This attitude and vision of language research is obviously broader than early logical positivism. As Wittgenstein said in Philosophical Investigations, the more closely we examine actual language, the sharper becomes the conflict between it and our requirement. The crystalline purity of logic was not a result of investigation, but a requirement. The conflict becomes intolerable. The requirement is now in danger of becoming empty. It is like we are walking on ice, where there is no friction. Therefore, the conditions are in some sense ideal. But precisely because of that we cannot walk. We want to walk. So we need friction. Back to the rough ground. Next, let's introduce Wittgenstein's classic masterpiece, the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. This book is actually very thin, almost the Western philosophical work with the fewest words I've read, and the most concise. The language is refined, the expression precise, the structure rigorous. When reading, you can even feel a beauty of thought. So I recommend everyone read the original. The book is divided into 6 main points. First, the world is everything that is the case. Second, what is the case? The fact is the existence of atomic facts. Third, the logical picture of the facts is the thought. Fourth, the thought is the significant proposition. Fifth, propositions are truth functions of elementary propositions. Sixth, the general form of truth function is the general form of proposition. Overall, Wittgenstein talks about how to understand the logic of the world through the logic of language, or how to know the world through language, using the relationship between the 2 main lines of language and the world. He also discusses the nature of philosophy, ethics, and so on. Of course, there are many mathematical deduction processes, which are omitted here. Let's first understand the basic logical structure of this book. The following content is slightly abstract. Please listen carefully. First, let's recognize a few concepts and their relationships: world, facts, states of affairs, and objects. The world is the totality of facts, not the totality of things. Facts include many states of affairs. States of affairs include many objects. Objects are the entities that make up the world, including all possibilities. This is a 4-layer relationship. World, facts, states of affairs, and objects, similar to a pyramid structure. Note that the world is the totality of facts. Facts are not just facts that have already happened, but also include things that have not happened. So the world here is a bit abstract. It is not completely reality. The world can be understood as the sum of all logical relationships, because Wittgenstein believed there is nothing in logic that is merely possible. Logic involves every possibility. All possibilities are logical facts. For example, you went to work today. This is a fact. But conversely, you did not work from home today. This is also a fact. Although it didn't happen, it is logically correct. The reasoning logic here is like this. First, objects can appear in any state of affairs. For example, you are at work today. This is you as an object. And today you are not working at home. Here you are also an object. And this object. You appeared in two states of affairs. So a state of affairs is a combination of objects. Additionally, the possibility of objects appearing in various states of affairs is the form of the object. And all these states of affairs constitute facts. And all facts constitute the world. The relationship here is a bit complex. You can listen to it repeatedly. Note that there are many states of affairs. For example, you are at work. This is a fact. It includes many states of affairs. For example, you are not working at home. You are not working anywhere else, etc. And all these states of affairs. And the logical relationship of objects in states of affairs constitute this fact. That you are at work. And facts in all time and space worldwide constitute the world. Object states of affairs, facts, and the world form a bottom-up pyramid structure. The world is at the top. Next, let's introduce a concept called reality. Reality is not actual existence. The existence and non-existence of states of affairs are reality. For example, you are currently at the company. You are currently not at home. Both states of affairs are reality. Total reality also constitutes the world. This is the same as the conclusion above. The many possibilities of states of affairs constitute facts. Facts constitute the world. This is a very important conclusion we have reached so far. Next, let's introduce a concept called picture. A picture is a model of reality. Note, this concept is very key. It is a link between language and the world. This is Wittgenstein associating objects in the world with pictures in the brain. The elements of the picture and objects have a one-to-one correspondence. He said the picture represents a possible situation in logical space. Just as a fact is in the world, the picture in the brain corresponds to the fact in the real world. The elements of the picture correspond to the objects of the state of affairs. The elements of the picture are related to each other in a certain way to constitute the whole picture. Just as objects constitute states of affairs in a certain way, and then constitute facts. So finally we reach a conclusion. A picture is a fact, or a fact in the brain that we can recognize. A picture represents a possible situation in logical space. Then we can further conclude that all logical pictures can picture the world. Up to here, we can link the world facts, states of affairs, objects, reality, pictures, and picture elements. Next, let's introduce a concept called thought. At the beginning, we introduce the picture in logical space, corresponding to the fact in the real world. Because a fact includes many states of affairs, we can also construct pictures of many states of affairs. We now view these logical pictures of facts as a thought. Because pictures are in the brain, we view them as a thought. How do we distinguish true and false thoughts? A picture is true or false, depending on whether the sense it expresses agrees with reality. A picture that agrees with reality is a true picture. Conversely, it is a false picture. For example, close your eyes and imagine a white horse with wings flying in the sky. Obviously, there is no corresponding reality, or no state of affairs or fact in the real world corresponds to it. So this picture is false. Not a true thought. Can include the possibility of all our thought situations. But the totality of true thoughts constitutes the picture of the real world. Next, let's introduce a few concepts called proposition and name. The simple sign in a proposition is a name. A name represents an object in a proposition. The relationship between name and proposition can be understood as the relationship between object and state of affairs. Object and fact. A proposition includes many names. A fact includes many objects. For example, in a proposition, sign A represents Matthew. Sign B represents Chloe. In the fact, Matthew is an object. Chloe is also an object. Additionally, the relationship between name and proposition. Names are like points, and propositions are like arrows, meaning propositions have sense. In mathematics, a proposition is similar to an expression. For example, a plus b equals c. This is an expression. A, B, and C represent simple signs or names. A, B, C can also be understood as objects in facts, or objects in thoughts. So Wittgenstein said, names in propositions correspond one-to-one with objects in thoughts. Then Wittgenstein concluded, a thought is a proposition with sense, and the totality of propositions is language. Of course, there are complicated arguments in between, and many mathematical reasoning processes. We won't go deep into them here. Today, starting from world states of affairs and objects, all the way through pictures, picture elements and thoughts, to propositions, names, and a series of concepts. We teased out several important conclusions. Let's briefly review. First, the world is the totality of facts. Logical pictures correspond to world pictures. The totality of true thoughts constitutes the world picture. A thought is a proposition with sense, and the totality of propositions is language. Remember 3 sentences. The world is the totality of facts. A proposition is a picture of the facts. Language is the totality of propositions. There are 3 keywords here: facts, pictures, and language. How are facts of the world and propositions of language connected? In between is the picture of the fact in the brain, which is the picture theory mentioned earlier. Wittgenstein believed there is a one-to-one correspondence between facts and propositions. When we say the proposition "the apple is sweet," the proposition we speak is an abstract picture of the fact. This feeling is like saying, we miss someone, and in our brain, a picture will appear. So there is a logical correspondence between objective facts and linguistic propositions. And language is the totality of propositions. The world is the totality of facts. Then we finally reach the conclusion about the relationship between language and the world. Language can reveal the logical relationships of the world. If we understand the logic of language, we understand the logic of the world. In this way, Wittgenstein linked world facts, pictures, thoughts, propositions, language, through a chain of logical deductions, to form a logically rigorous whole. Whether the structure of this whole is fitting, it is a self-contained system, very rigorous, even excellent. Here I introduced the first half of the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. Today's content is a bit abstract. The logical structure is also relatively complex. This is already a simplified version, but it doesn't matter if you don't understand it immediately. It is said that when Wittgenstein took this book for his doctoral defense, philosophers Moore and Russell were the examiners. After hearing Wittgenstein's defense, the 2 great philosophers didn't know what to ask. In the end, Wittgenstein patted them gently on the shoulder and said, "Don't be upset, I know you'll never understand it." We continue to introduce Wittgenstein's masterpiece, the Tractatus. We just introduced the first half of the book. Wittgenstein linked the world facts, pictures, thoughts, propositions, and language through a chain of logical deductions, establishing a logically rigorous analytic language system. The starting point of this logic is the world. The end point is language. Remember 3 sentences. The world is the totality of facts. A proposition is a picture of the facts. Language is the totality of propositions. Next, we continue to introduce the second half of the book, regarding those unsayable things. First, let's look at Wittgenstein's reflection on the self. What is the self? This is also a core question. In Western philosophy, Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." Is the self the I think? In the epistemology of Western philosophy, the problem of the self has always been debated. In the view of rationalism and empiricism, there are 2 diametrically opposite explanations for the self. Rationalists believe the self is the subject of thought, consciousness, and spirit. Just as the rationalist philosopher Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am," while empiricists believe the self is a bundle of perceptions formed by habit. The self is a bundle of perceptions. Empiricist philosopher Berkeley said, "Objects are combinations of sensations. To be is to be perceived." So what exactly is the self? Wittgenstein gave a different explanation. From the perspective of language analysis, is the self the subject of representation? Is the self the object of experience? Wittgenstein actually denied both statements. He believed the self is not the subject of representation, nor the object of experience. He said the self is a subject. It does not belong to the world, but is a limit of the world. The self is the origin of knowledge, but we cannot know it. How did Wittgenstein propose and argue this? Here we first introduce a concept of the subject. Subject is relative to object. This concept is very vague in Western philosophy. As mentioned above, rationalism and empiricism have diametrically opposite answers. Let's give an example. We say a person is a subject. A company is also a subject. A country is also a subject. For example, the subject of a company. Can you say it is the collection of all members? Obviously, it seems not. Because the subject of a company also includes intellectual property, team, creativity, culture, etc. It is a very abstract and vague concept. Similarly, an individual is a subject of the individual. Obviously, not just the physical combination of eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and body. Humans also have thoughts, consciousness, and emotions, etc. So looking at the subject simply, it has spirituality and materiality. Actually, in Wittgenstein's thought, the subject is an existence higher than spirituality and materiality, similar to an invisible third party, similar to God. But it does not exist. Wittgenstein used a vivid metaphor. He said, where in the world is a metaphysical subject to be found? They are like the eye and the visual field. We often say the eye is the window to the soul. We can see the world through the eye, but we cannot see our own eye. Conversely, in the visual field, there is nothing from which you can infer that it is seen by an eye. Wittgenstein also said, no part of our experience is at the same time a priori. What does this mean? An independent self does not exist. For example, we are looking at a mobile phone, but we cannot see from the height of an independent self that I am looking at a mobile phone. For example, I am looking in the mirror. I see my eyes. But I cannot see that I am looking in the mirror. Or try to think a thought. Can you discover a thinker outside the thought? Perhaps we can imagine. There is a thinker independent of the thought. But if we reflect further, you will find this is just another thought we are thinking. So Wittgenstein believed. We cannot discover the subject in the world, because there is no such thing as a thinking or imagining subject. However, we have many experiences in the world. We say this is my experience. But this does not mean this is my property, because there is no subject that owns this experience. Although I have disappeared from my world, and do not appear in my world, the world is still my world. This is like a person standing on a cliff, looking at the world below, but he cannot see the world behind him. So Wittgenstein said the subject does not belong to the world. However, it is a limit of the world. In a sense, the self does not exist. We cannot think what we cannot think. We cannot say what we cannot think. So the limits of my language mean the limits of my world. This is Wittgenstein's early reflection on the problem of the self. At the beginning of the Tractatus, Wittgenstein said, "Everything that can be said clearly. Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must remain silent. So what cannot be spoken of? There are at least 5 types. Ethics, the meaning of life, the self, the existence of the world and the meaning of the world." We introduced the unsayable self earlier. Next, let's introduce the other unsayable things. Regarding the existence of the world and the meaning of the world, Wittgenstein has a famous quote. He said, "It is not how things are in the world that is mystical, but that it exists." How to understand this sentence? First, how things are in the world is not mystical at all. This means how the world operates, what logical laws it follows. Wittgenstein believed logic fills the world. The limits of the world are also the limits of logic. So things within the world can be said clearly and follow certain logic. It is not mystical. But next, the fact that the world exists is mystical. What does this mean? For example, how the earth moves. Physicists can explain. But why the earth exists here? This we cannot know. Meaning why the world exists. This we cannot explain with logic. Because if it could be explained by logic, it would mean it is within our world. It is a sayable part. But now why the world exists? Like why the earth revolves around the sun. Why it is exactly at this position in the Milky Way. These questions we cannot answer. They are mystical. So we can also understand Wittgenstein saying, the sense of the world must lie outside the world. It can actually be understood as the meaning of the world's existence lies outside the world. Or why the world exists is unknowable. Next, let's talk about the meaning of life. Wittgenstein said, "We feel that even if all possible scientific questions be answered, the problems of life have still not been touched at all. Of course, there is then no question left. And just this is the answer. The solution of the problem of life is seen in the vanishing of this problem. The problem of the meaning of life is actually the same as the problem of the meaning of the world's existence. The meaning of life lies outside life. The meaning of the world lies outside the world. We can never know the meaning of life. Just as Wittgenstein said, the world and life are one. The mystical is not how things are in the world, but that the world exists. The problem of the meaning of life is like asking why there is something rather than nothing. Actually, not just human existence. The existence of the world is unsayable. In Wittgenstein's view, the existence of all things is unsayable, or accidental. Just as Wittgenstein said, the sense of the world must lie outside the world. In the world everything is as it is, and happens as it does happen. In it there is no value, and if there were it would be of no value. If there is a value, which is of value, it must lie outside all happening and being so. For all happening and being so is accidental. Existence is accidental, or the meaning of existence is unknown. Just like we study optics to figure out the phenomena and laws of light. But we can never answer why light exists, why there is light. What is the meaning of light? Such questions are outside of optics, like the meaning of life. Regarding ethics and aesthetics, Wittgenstein also said, ethics and aesthetics are transcendental, beyond human experience, cannot be explained clearly by logic. So they also belong to the unsayable things. Okay, the general content of the Tractatus is introduced here. The book has 7 sections, but the first 6 sections are actually thoughts of logical positivism, using logical and mathematical language to describe this world. Everything can be said clearly. Logic exists. So Wittgenstein said, the limits of logic are the limits of the world. Only within the world is the content we can speak of. After explaining these, Wittgenstein added a 7th section. And this section has only one sentence. He said, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must remain silent. Perhaps hinting that the truly important and vast things are the unsayable parts we mentioned earlier. Wittgenstein's philosophy is divided into 2 stages. The early stage centered on the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. The later stage centered on philosophical investigations. In the early stage, Wittgenstein focused on logic, dividing the world into sayable and unsayable parts. And this dividing line is logic. Wittgenstein said logic fills the world. The limits of the world are the limits of logic. In the later stage, Wittgenstein focused on language, especially ordinary language. Through the analysis of ordinary language, he constructed his other epistemological thought. The writing style of philosophical investigations is also very different from the previous book. The Tractatus is very concise and precise, logically rigorous, only about 70 pages, with profound thoughts. But the later philosophical investigations is more fragmentary in language. Thought expression is also vaguer. Today let's simply compare the main differences between Wittgenstein's early and late thoughts, to see how Wittgenstein achieved self-subversion. If the Tractatus focused on logic, showing Western philosophy's worship of reason behind logic, Western philosophy since ancient Greece has focused on reason. In ancient Greece, the source of the word logic is Heraclitus proposing logos. Logos actually means speech, logic, and essence. Scholars have proposed ancient human civilizations have 3 main directions. The first is Chinese civilization, which is utility-based, focusing on the role of empirical intuition in knowledge. Chinese ancient classics, especially the Tao in Tao Te Ching, is largely a metaphor for the Tao of nature, changes and laws of nature, containing elements of intuition and experience. Confucian thought is full of practical wisdom. In this pragmatism and empiricism, although knowledge is uncertain, knowledge comes from life and applies to life. The second direction is Indian civilization, which is nihilism-based. We cannot obtain certain knowledge, showing the world has a certain nihilism. The world we think is real might actually be a void. Ancient Greece found a third path, outside of utility and nihilism. This is reason. Senses cannot obtain 100% knowledge, but reason can. Ancient Greek philosopher Plato proposed the famous theory of forms, distinguishing the world of phenomena and the world of forms, compared to the illusion and unreality of the phenomena world. The world of forms is the true essence and certainty, and believed. We can use reason to know the world of forms. After this, Western philosophy went further down the path of reason. Wittgenstein's early philosophical thought obviously inherited this spirit of reason, and proposed his own thoughts from the perspective of language analysis. So Wittgenstein proposed in the Tractatus, logic is the boundary of the world, using logic to distinguish sayable and unsayable events. But in Wittgenstein's later philosophical investigations, he clearly saw the limitations of logic and reason, and their narrowness, and conducted self-critique and reflection. In Philosophical Investigations, Wittgenstein said the world is surrounded by a halo. Its essence, logic, presents an order. It is the a priori order of the world. Under such an illusion, we think propositions, concepts, words, proofs, truth, experience, etc. have an order. This order is a so-called superconcept, a superorder between things. Of course, exactly the opposite is true. If these words, language, experience, world have a use, it must be as humble as the use of words like table and door. In this passage, we see a microcosm of Wittgenstein reflecting on his language philosophy. Wittgenstein believed early on that one could grasp the essence of the world through the logic of language. But this is an illusion. Moreover, he further believed this goal is unattainable by anyone. The essence of language is a game. Those seemingly lofty immortal words in philosophy, compared to ordinary words, do not hold any special status in language games. In Philosophical Investigations, Wittgenstein saw a broader world outside of logic, realizing that logical analysis of language structures is overly narrow for living language. Just as he said in Philosophical Investigations, the meaning of a word is its use in the language. Language is the carrier of thought, but language itself has no so-called essence and meaning. Language is a game. Thus he proposed the famous language game theory. So from the above we can actually see Wittgenstein's early thought focused more on reason and logic, believing that through the logic of language, through reason, one can understand the essence of the world. This thought opened a new philosophical school, analytic philosophy. But later Wittgenstein subverted his own thoughts, believing his previous thoughts had grave errors, and overturned them, moving from essentialism to anti-essentialism, from focusing on reason and logic to focusing more on intuition, experience, and practice. I must say, this is a transcendence of self by Wittgenstein. In Wittgenstein's philosophical investigations, he proposed two very important concepts, called family resemblance and language games. What is a language game? In early Wittgenstein's thought, language had a certainty. The logic of language could describe a certain world, or a purer, more essential world. Actually, this thought started from ancient Greece, in Plato's theory of forms, regarding the concept of horse. In real life, we can see various concrete horses: white horses, black horses, tall or short horses. But we cannot see a horse as a concept. No horse can represent the concept of horse. But in language, in our mind we have the concept of horse. This concept necessarily corresponds to the prototype of horse, or the idea of horse. The horse in this idea, the prototype of the concept of horse, is imperceptible to us, but can be directly understood or known by our reason. Because the idea of horse is understood by our reason, we generate the concept of horse. An ancient Chinese thinker, Gongsun Long, also proposed the famous proposition, a white horse is not a horse. It is somewhat similar. The concrete white horse and the abstract concept of horse are different. This is called the problem of universals in philosophy, also called universal propositions. For example, white horses and black horses are all horses. Red flowers, red leaves, red flags are all red. For horse and red. Such relatively simple universal problems. We can explain the formation of abstract concepts from the common properties between individuals. For example, every individual horse has certain common properties. We can derive the concept of horse from these common properties. But Wittgenstein believed there are many concepts we cannot explain with universals. For example, the beauty of flowers, the beauty of sunset, the beauty of music. We can hardly find common features in these beauties. But beauty is not a subjective concept. Because when we say something is beautiful, everyone can appreciate this beauty. So, simply put, language has a decisiveness, certainty, and essentiality. This tradition of thought actually started from ancient Greece. But Wittgenstein realized the problem within. Language is relatively flexible. Language has no fixed, unchanging essence, especially in ordinary language. Apple used to be just a fruit. In some scenarios today, it represents a mobile phone. Now the concept of apple has been expanded. So how to understand the complex relationship of universals in concepts and ordinary language? Wittgenstein proposed family resemblance in 100 different kinds of beauty. Perhaps they do not have common characteristics, but there is a certain similarity between individuals. This relationship is like that between individuals in a family. You can hardly summarize the common characteristics of everyone in a family. But family members have certain similarities. For example, the beauty of sunset glow and morning glow have certain similarities. The beauty of sunset glow and the beauty of a beautiful woman's face also have certain similarities. The beauty of a beautiful woman's face and the beauty of a flower also have certain similarities. But there is no commonality in all these beauties. These similarities are overlapping and crisscrossing similarities. This is what Wittgenstein calls family resemblance. It is not a commonality. The fundamental reason Wittgenstein proposed family resemblance lies in the fact that he saw language has no so-called unique unchanging commonality, nor a so-called essence. This is an anti-essentialist thought, diametrically opposite to his early linguistic essentialism. If language and concepts have no so-called essence, then how do we distinguish and use them in daily life? For example, when you ask me to buy an apple, how do I know if you want me to buy a fruit or a mobile phone? If in the language world, from pure linguistic analysis, it is hard to explain clearly, but in real life, we easily understand what you want me to buy. Every word concept has a specific usage environment, and this characteristic Wittgenstein called language game. Language games and family resemblance together form our understanding of ordinary language. Let's give an example. Every game has specific rules, but there is no such thing as an essential absolute game rule. For example, the rules of basketball, football, and badminton are different, and different games have their own language systems. For example, in the philosophy game, idea, experience, concept, essence, a priori, spirit. These are the languages of philosophy. And in the internet game, track, ecosystem, IP, new species, private traffic, growth, hacker. These are the languages of the internet. Just as in the internet language game, we say apple versus in the life game, we say apple, they are completely different. Every concept has its own meaning in different contexts, in different games. But there is no absolute meaning of the essence of a concept. If Wittgenstein has any consistent thought in Tractatus and philosophical investigations, it is his understanding of philosophy itself. Philosophy is a therapy. In philosophical investigations, he said philosophy treats a question, like treating an illness. In Wittgenstein's thought, philosophy is a clarification, an explanation, a description, not a creation. In philosophical investigations, Wittgenstein has a famous quote. He asked, "What is your aim in philosophy?" His answer was, "To show the fly the way out of the fly bottle." In other words, the exit of the fly bottle is right there. And the work of philosophy is just to point out the path flying to the exit. Philosophy is a clarification, a statement. In the Tractatus, Wittgenstein also said, regarding philosophy, most propositions or questions written are not false, but nonsensical. Therefore, we cannot answer such questions. We can only state their nonsensicality. And this is not surprising. The deepest problems are actually not problems at all. The aim of philosophy is the logical clarification of thoughts. Philosophy is not a theory, but an activity. The main work of philosophy is clarification. The result of philosophy is not a number of philosophical propositions, but to make propositions clear. Philosophy should make thoughts, which are otherwise opaque and blurred, clear, and draw sharp boundaries for them. On the question of whether philosophical problems are real, there is a famous story, an anecdote between Wittgenstein and philosopher Popper. Popper was the founder of the philosophy of science. He proposed falsifiability as the demarcation line and criterion between science and non-science. Once Popper was invited to attend a lecture held by the Cambridge Moral Sciences Club. The title of Popper's lecture was "Are There Philosophical Problems?" Obviously, in Popper's view, this problem exists. And this title was also aimed at Wittgenstein. During the lecture, the two had a fierce argument. Wittgenstein demanded Popper give an example of a philosophical problem. Popper said, "Can we know things through senses? Can we obtain knowledge through induction?" Wittgenstein believed these are both logical problems, not philosophical problems. Popper raised the problem of infinity. Wittgenstein believed this is a mathematical problem, not a philosophical problem either. Popper mentioned ethical problems. At this moment, Wittgenstein picked up a poker from the fireplace, pointed it at Popper, and said, "Please give a genuine ethical problem." Popper insisted, "This is a genuine ethical problem," and said, "Not to threaten visiting lecturers with pokers." Wittgenstein was furious upon hearing this, threw down the poker and left. This is the famous poker incident. In Wittgenstein's view, there are no genuine philosophical problems. The philosophical problems here are actually those vague propositions. And Wittgenstein believed all problems can be said clearly. Those that cannot be said clearly are not problems. And the work of philosophy is the clarification of these sayable problems. In Wittgenstein's view, the aim of philosophical research is not to establish one's own thought system, but to propose a series of explanations. In the preface to Philosophical Investigations, he calls his philosophical work investigations, not research. The work of philosophy is to discover the truth, not to create the truth. Wittgenstein's main philosophical thoughts. We end our introduction here. Wittgenstein is one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century. His thoughts gave us two huge shocks. The first time Wittgenstein proposed philosophy is the speculation of language. And language has boundaries. And Wittgenstein pointed out to us where the boundaries of this world are. The limits of logic are the limits of the world. And outside the boundaries, although there is a vast world, they are not within the scope of logic. We cannot speak of them. Therefore, he said, whereof one cannot speak, we must remain silent. The second time was Wittgenstein bravely overthrew the thoughts of his first half of life. Language has no essence. The world has no so-called boundaries. Language is just a game. This world is not precise and determined, but vague and rough. He said the more closely we examine actual language, the sharper becomes the conflict between it and our requirement. This conflict becomes increasingly intolerable. That requirement is now in danger of becoming empty. We are walking on ice, where there is no friction. Therefore the conditions are in some sense ideal. But precisely because of that, we cannot walk. We want to walk. So we need friction. So please return to the rough ground. Thus Wittgenstein overthrew the logically rigorous, pure and absolute language world he built with his own hands, letting language return to daily life. Wittgenstein's attitude towards philosophy is admirable. Actually, whether Wittgenstein's early or later thoughts are just a seed, a ladder, just as he said himself. Any person who understands me eventually recognizes my propositions as nonsensical. These propositions are just ladders for him to climb. But after he transcends these ladders, he must throw away the ladder. He must transcend these propositions. Then he can see the world correctly. All right, the Wittgenstein Philosophical Thought series ends here. I am Raymond Shadow. Welcome to like and subscribe. See you next time.